on around the world on bovine colostrum, which is good. So I put a little bit of an overview. I like to do that if I have someone from different countries, just to get an idea of what I'm going to do. But try to cover some basic information about colostrum, but then with a follow-up always of how can we get our producers, the farmers that we work with, to do a better job on colostrum and put the pieces together to help the calves be healthier. My computer's being slow. It's not reacting now.
Try to use the down button.
I did. That was my first choice. And it's not working.
Okay. Or let me see.
Okay. Well, I don't know what I did. Okay. Basically, colostrum is the most important thing. It means a productive animal or not, and there's a lot of older literature and some newer literature showing that the productivity of that animal in terms of its health as a calf, its growth as a heifer, and all the way through production and first lactation comes back to colostrum. But so much of it has to do with keeping that calf healthy and getting that animal off to a good start. Has a lot to do with economics on a farm. And if we get a little time at the end, I'll talk about economics. And heifer economics is one of the driving forces that today makes a difference of a dairy farm that is making a living for the dairy farm versus being a subsistence farm and not doing good or putting farmers out of business. In the U.S., and I'm sure it's the same here, we have about 5 to 8% of our dairy farms go out of business every year, and primarily because of economics. They're simply not making enough money, and lots of times they blame it on the next generation not coming onto the farm. But you know, for example, I was raised on a dairy farm, but we had 28 cows. My father had 28 cows, and somewhere along going to college, I decided, you know, I don't want that as my life. I love dairy cows and working with farmers, but I can't see that, and our farm wasn't any bigger than that. So, you know, the next year our farm went out of business because of that, and that's what's happening. If we can't show the next generation that this is good, they're not going to stay. That's all there is to it. Okay, so back to colostrum. It's the first secretion of the mammary gland after an involution. And that's the critical thing. It may or may not coincide with when she has a calf. Normally does. Benefits of colostrum, number one, are the immunoglobulins, which she doesn't have at birth. I forgetting whether I took out a couple slides on that, but part of the problem with the bovine as well as the equine is that immunoglobulins can't be transferred from the blood of the mother to the unborn fetus. And in the bovine, we have 3 layers of tissue on both sides of that equation there that prohibits that from happening. And so it becomes a critical thing. There are many other species that, including humans, that's not a problem, but it happens to be in the bovine. And what we have to do is make sure that the system that is there is utilized well on the farm to get that to happen right after birth. So that's number one. Number two, colostrum has a lot of fat, which has energy. The calf is born very low in fat reserves, and with some of our modern feeding systems, an actually common one in the U.S. Where we're trying to look at decreasing some metabolic disease in early lactation is they'll put cows on a high straw diet for a dry cow diet, which is going to be low in energy. And so what you find is that these calves are born even more depleted in fat than normal because some of those low energy diets. It's not going to kill a calf. It may be detrimental in the wintertime if they're born in a very cold environment because they have very little energy reserves. But colostrum is really high in fat and can make up a big difference there. Tends to have a lot of minerals in it, both trace minerals and macro minerals. It's one of the great things where that calf may need some of these things early on in life and born with low reserves, and colostrum has it. Has a lot of biologically active proteins. That's one where there's a lot of research being done on. It's interesting, many of these biologically active proteins don't survive pasteurization or heating, and they don't survive freezing. So there's been a lot of research looking at, well, as I'll cover, that if you have dirty colostrum, you heat treat your colostrum to get the E. coli and other bacteria down, which also kills many of these biologically active proteins. If you have to freeze colostrum to have an extra supply, it kills many of those. But there aren't any studies that have ever shown that not having these biologically active proteins is detrimental to the calf. So they're there. We know some good things that they do, but we know the calf can survive without most of them. So that's one I really didn't cover more practical information on because I'm not sure where that's going to end up. Calves are living without it quite well. Some of the compounds that are in colostrum, however, have a lot to do with gut development. There are many of these that I'll cover. Basically, some of the sugars, some of the oligosaccharides and things that are in colostrum have great effects on small intestine development. In terms of dangers from colostrum, the number one thing is bacteria. And there's been a lot done on that in the last 15 years, really, on how bad bacteria really is. It basically has a direct competition for IgG absorption. So as we have problems with calves that it seems like everything should be going right, it's often bacteria that's causing the problem. There are many diseases that can be transferred through colostrum, just like milk, tuberculosis, brucellosis, things like that. Bovine leukosis can have a direct transfer. For some farms, they say it's inconvenient to collect and manage, and I have worked with farms that only feed colostrum substitutes because they say it's just too much work to get good quality colostrum, and I always want to argue with them that they have to be able to do this, but there are a few farms that just say they can't. To get back to the nutrient composition, yes. Sure.
By an economic point of view, is it really convenient to buy also colostrum substitutes? Is it economically worth it? Or not?
Oh, the substitutes are for us are very expensive. For us, it's about $35 per unit of substitute.
And they still prefer to buy from outside than make their own cows.
Yeah, they say, I've worked with several farms that just absolutely say I would rather pay the $35 per calf. So, yeah, doesn't make sense to me either, so. Okay, in terms of nutrient composition of colostrum, it basically, it normally has about twice as much fat as whole milk, 3 times as much protein or 4 times as much protein. So it is a nutrient, a good dense source of nutrients. I use this slide, let me see if my arrow is working a little bit, yeah. I use this slide from a study we did several years ago where we collected colostrum samples from dairy farms. We went out to Holstein farms and left them a container to put some colostrum in from the next time they were feeding a heifer calf. So we made the assumption, we were trying to say, hey, we're going to analyze your colostrum. I want it to be what you are feeding a calf that you plan on having in your herd. So we could easily anticipate, I mean, I wanted to see what was being fed, but we also could anticipate that they're not going to be doing that unless, they're not going to put that colostrum in there unless they think it's pretty good colostrum, and because they know someone's watching them. Yeah, the last thing you want to do is do something bad and then have someone from the university see it. So I would think my sample should be biased towards good quality samples. And our averages were right about where we would expect them based on the literature. But it's interesting, we had one colostrum sample that had 2% fat. Okay, that's not colostrum, that's skim milk. We had one that had 1.2% lactose. So we had some really poor samples. And when I'll show you the IgG data with it, they were also very poor. So people hope they're doing a good job, but they're not sometimes. Now the immunoglobulins, now for some of you this is old stuff, but basically the immunoglobulins are 2 parts. We've got the general part here, which is in blue, the specific components of these IgGs that I have in yellow. I guess with the pandemic, we're all so much more attuned to what's going on with these today. But suffice to say that the specificity here is something that's important for that farm, and it could be very important depending on what kind of an organism that's on the farm. But again, this is where the colostrum substitutes may not be doing the job for the farm. They have the generic IgGs, but they don't have that specific one that we need on a farm. So if you have a farmer that is using a substitute, it may work well, but in 6 months he may be having some real problems with calf mortality. And it's because he's got a bacteria, that just isn't, or a virus that just isn't being affected because of being specific. And then the solution is use his own colostrum. There are 3 major types of immunoglobulins in colostrum. Most of my information and a lot of the research focuses on IgGs because they're 85%. They're the major one. But IgMs and IgAs are also of importance to the calf. They're also found in colostrum substitutes, but again, they're not quite as specific, but they do play a part in immunity. Sometimes at the gut level, they're not necessarily absorbed like the IgGs are, but they will have an effect in the small intestine. So this is just I use this slide for dairy farmers. It's an old slide, but just to remind them, you've got this unborn fetus. We have all these immunoglobulins, antibodies in the blood of that cow. And sometimes we've done it through vaccinations, and that's been one of the key ways that we've improved colostrum in the last 30 years. But we vaccinate the cow for something, but if we're going to have any effect on that calf, we're going to have to get colostrum into it right away. And so that calf just has to get those same antibodies there. However, I don't like to see pictures, and I try not to have too many of them, where I have the adult cow and the calf together very long, because as long as I have that cow breathing on that calf, again, it's like us wearing masks. I mean, there's a disease transfer possibility there. And the longer that calf stays with the cow, the more potential disease transfer you're going to have. And that's one that modern management has pretty well gotten past. We have, most of the farms that I work with don't have any problem taking the calf away immediately, getting the transfer down. It's not only respiratory disease, but in our calf pens, we've got manure, and you know that has a real problem. So the end result is we want healthy calves, and this is one of the newer studies on looking at the rate of sickness and death in calves with different levels of serum IgGs. This was a study done by our USDA where they went out and took blood samples from calves that would be 24 to 48 hours of age. And I'll show you why that in a few minutes. And then looked at various levels of, IgGs in it. For a long time, we've used the cutoff of having serum IgGs of 10 or more grams per liter. That's still probably a really good cutoff. If you take a sample from a calf and you find either blood IgGs or the equivalent serum proteins, and I'll show you that in a bit, of less than 10, the probability of that calf getting sick or dying is absolutely much higher. When it comes to this data, and we have some new recommendations I'll show you at the end, that basically you can't get enough colostrum into calves. You can't get IgG levels high enough. They will always reduce morbidity, but it's kind of interesting that 10 cutoff is where mortality stays low. So getting 10 or more will reduce mortality, but from all the studies that I've seen, the higher you can get serum IgGs, the lower the morbidity rates go. And so we've actually, we're finding more and more farms are doing such a good job that we can find a lot of farms with greater than 25 grams per liter of IgGs in that 1 to 2 day old calf. And as you go back through the older studies, that was the unusual one to see a calf like that. And now we're getting 20–25% of the calves on farms are having those kind of levels. So we can definitely do a better job, and I would say farms in general are doing a better job on this. And I think we're going to someday get to a point of where we shouldn't have any farms having blood IgGs close to 10. It's unrealistic. We know too many ways to get away from that. I mean, this is flat out a mistake to have an IgG level that low. Now, this is one where some of you that weren't in yesterday's, I like to once in a while put a slide in to show people that we haven't known everything about dairy management for 100 years. We first learned about colostrum and many of the reasons behind colostrum back in the mid-late 1970s, which, you know, that's kind of alarming. This guy here by the name of Stott was the one who developed the colostrometer, which is a basically we measure density, and I'll show you that in a bit, of colostrum, but he didn't do that until 1979. We didn't really have a way to measure this on farm until then. But he was the first one to show in the literature that, hey, age at feeding has a big effect in terms of absorption and volume of colostrum. I mean, his studies back then were feeding a half a liter, 1 liter, or 2 liters of colostrum. Well, today, you know, half a liter or 1 liter is completely unacceptable. 2 liters is kind of borderline in some cases. So, you know, it's interesting that he was the first to show that, hey, that goes down with time. Absorption, the capability of that calf to absorb goes way down, and it's all dependent on volume. So it's that combination. This is one of the more recent studies in here, but what I like to use this for is to remind us when you're out on a farm and you want to see what levels of management this farmer has. The easy way to do it is take a blood sample, measure serum protein, as I'll show you, or IgGs. This is going after IgGs. But of where they should be. The calf starts off at 0, and every research study, I mean, basically shows you take that sample at birth and it is 0. It goes up very rapidly, but after 24 hours, it starts to drop off. And this slide is showing the MC is maternal colostrum. This is a colostrum substitute, and this is a combination here that I'm showing you. And for the important point here is yes, they can all make a nice improvement, and we all can get high levels of IgGs, but they drop off very quickly. And it's typical, I get out and I see a veterinarian that's out, and you're saying, well, I want to check out this calf. I don't have one that's 24 to 48 hours, but you've got a calf that's 7 days old, 5 days old, or whatever. So I take a blood sample of that, and by 5-6 days, you've had a big drop off in IgGs and all the other immunoglobulins. It's because of the normal turnover. These are living cells in a living body. They die off, and the calf does not have the mechanism like most neonates early on to do that. And as you can see from the slide here, it's not till week 6 and week 7 before it starts to go back up. And if I had data here from 8, 9, 10, 11, you'll see it goes up very high, very fast. But it's at a low point here in week 4 and week 5. The other point here to show you is that the colostrum substitutes and the combinations, we have products on the market today that will get us consistently serum protein levels above 10, and they can do very well. The older data clearly showed, and my old slides used to say, don't use a colostrum substitute, they're not any good. Don't mix them with colostrum, it doesn't work. And that was the old generation of those compounds. So they have improved greatly, and they do work. They still cost $35, so, you know, but they do work. However, it's in the case of a high quality maternal colostrum, you can't beat it. I mean, that we can get the highest levels of serum IgGs with a really high quality colostrum. And this is just an example of a study where every calf getting that high quality maternal colostrum had 25 or above milligrams per mil of IgGs. And for those of you not familiar, I mean, these are my standard error bars. So this is giving me 68% of the population here. So a vast majority of them are here, and I can get calves at 30 or above. That we used to say if you got a 30 or 35 in serum IgG, someone made a mistake in the lab. Go back and redo that, but that's not true. I mean, we can get that to be very high. The other point with this is the drop off in IgGs is really the curves are the same. So if I'm using a substitute or a supplement, colostrum supplement, because it isn't good, I can basically have the same curve in colostrum, and so I'm going to have the best protection there. The other management thing here that I want to show you is here at week 5 and week 6, these levels are the lowest. And we know that the disease prevalence on a calf is going to be related to the exposure they have to disease and the IgG level. And it's a balancing act. And so if I have high levels of IgG, I can have maybe some more problems on that farm and the calf is still healthy. But you have other farms where they have, you know, reasonably good levels of IgGs, but management and nutrition and the environment is bad, they're sick. So it is a balancing act. But in general, the calf is going to be at its lowest point somewhere between week 4 and week 7. So that's the point in time where the farm manager needs to stress the calves as little as possible, because that's where stress will throw them into a problem of respiratory disease or other things. And it's real common on farms to have some respiratory disease issue, disease scours and things at this age range. If they overstress that calf, and it's partially because biologically it's got low levels of immunity then. Now there's 3 steps to good colostrum absorption, and that's something you got to get across to a producer. I know as a veterinarian you know that, but it's ingestion of colostrum, digestion, and absorption. The calf has number 2 and 3 down really well, but number 1 is management. And so that's where farmers need to make sure they're doing it right. The calf has this unique thing well, first of all, their rumen reticulum omasum is not functioning at birth, but they have some muscular folds in here that will close, and they actually close with the sights and sounds and smells of a liquid feed. Colostrum or milk does it. The neck of the calf doesn't have to be up or down. It's obviously so much easier if the calf is up like this, but it allows that first colostrum, and also all the time they're feeding milk or milk replacer to go directly into the abomasum. This is about probably a week old or so calf, just to show you. And the next time you do a necropsy on one, it's always interesting to, I think it's interesting to find this, but you definitely have the muscular folds here that close. It's pretty easy to see that this can work quite well. Now, a point on this from the farm manager is that I will tell you, in many farms will use an esophageal feeder. Is that a term you use here? I forget. We call them a tube feeder or esophageal feeder, where I put this a tube down the throat of the calf with colostrum. Yeah. I've got a picture of one later, but okay. But the point on that a producer is always going to be concerned about is that when I use an esophageal feeder, sure, I can get it down to here, but I can never get it here. And one of the things that that makes this esophageal groove open up is adrenaline. And anytime that I'm force feeding that calf colostrum, I'm going to increase adrenaline. They're not going to have a normal suckling response often, and so this esophageal groove will not work when I'm tube feeding a calf. Pretty much always that colostrum is going to end up going into the undeveloped rumen, but there have been several studies in the last 10 years clearly showing that the IgG differences in those calves is zero. It's the same as a calf that's fed with a bottle or having normal suckling. So there's going to be a delay, but it can't be, it's probably maybe 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and it really has no significant effect on the calf. So step two, after that calf gets colostrum, either with a bottle, a bucket, or the esophageal feeder, is the clotting of colostrum. Basically, the calf, one of the few enzymes that are functioning at birth is renin. Renin is the same compound that a cheesemaker uses to make cheese. It creates whey and curd in the calf. The curd has fat and protein, and renin is specific only for milk fat and milk protein. So therein lies a difference between a calf-fed milk replacer or a calf-fed milk. When I feed a calf whole milk during its feeding period, renin will always work and the calf will always get curd formation. And what happens with curd formation, it allows the protein and fat to be digested slowly, which fits in very well with the newborn calf because they don't have digestive enzymes functioning well the first few days of life. And it virtually eliminates the problem of scours. If I didn't have curd formation, I would get all that fat going into the small intestine right away. It wouldn't be digested, and as well as the protein, it would go off into the small intestine, or large intestine, and give me all sorts of scours. But so that creates this to stay here, and then the whey has the milk sugar, many proteins and minerals, and IgGs are non-casein protein, so they don't end up in the curd very much at all. A few get stuck in there, but they get shunted off in the small intestine immediately. And so this is what you end up with, and you'll see this on a necropsy once in a while of a newborn calf that's gotten colostrum. There's been a lot of interesting research done on curd formation, but it's an important part of digestion of colostrum in the calf. This is just one that I thought you might be interested in, and it's where they took some X-rays of calves fed colostrum and then showing that curd formation over time. This is at 0 hours. This is taking a look at the abomasal curd in these calves. So at 0 hours where we don't have colostrum being fed, there's no curd there. And just to show you, right, half an hour after that colostrum fed, you have this giant curd here. And it's going to be depicted, you know, depending on how much colostrum that calf got fed. And following that through 2 hours, 8 hours, and you know, depending on the volume here, at 8 hours is still a pretty good sized curd in that calf. And the same will be true if that calf is fed whole milk. One of the things that I am always giving farmers a hard time at is sometimes they're feeding their young calves. They always ask the question to feed them once a day, twice a day, or 3 times a day. And I see farms feeding calves whole milk 3 times a day, and it makes no sense at all. Because when I feed that calf twice a day, it's got a curd in there 8 hours, 12 hours later. When I feed the calf the next time, all I do is increase the size of that curd. And it's much like the way that cow's rumen is feeding the cow the rest of her life. It has a vat of nutrients there that it's supplying nutrients to the blood of that calf 24 hours a day. So it works very well. It's also one of the reasons why, if you have a dairy farmer in today's world, because of labor shortages, they may be feeding calves milk once a day, and it works very well. In fact, it's very logical to feed dairy calves once a day if it's whole milk, because they'll feed 5-6 liters of milk one time a day, get a giant curd here, and the calf is being fed fat and protein 24 hours, just like it would normally. If it's milk replacer, though, that becomes an issue because milk replacer don't have casein. The casein's been taken out and made into cheese, which is what we do. The whey protein is in there, and whey protein, in terms of the biology of it, the amino acid composition is very comparable to casein. So there's nothing wrong with the protein. It just doesn't form a curd, and it's digested differently. The fat and protein in milk replacer get shunted into the small intestine much faster. So the fat and protein has to be readily digestible in that calf, or we're going to have some scours. But with colostrum, this works great, and with whole milk works great. Then you have the third step of colostrum, which is where these IgGs, and I should have put some, there are some better pictures than this, but these IgGs are very large proteins, extremely large proteins, as a matter of fact, but there is a pH gradient system that basically allows these IgGs to attach to the gut side of the cells lining the small intestine, and they get transported very quickly across into the blood, and they're basically latched on and moved over within a 5-minute time period, mainly based off of pH gradient. However, there are many species of bacteria that also can work with that same attachment. And so E. coli most species of E. coli can just very easily get attached and move across within 5 minutes. The system shuts down with time, but it also, when I have molecules moving across here, it actually self-shuts the system down. This system will only carry so many molecules across before it doesn't work anymore. And management-wise, that's where we've made some big improvements, because we've learned that once you start feeding colostrum, you've got to get the full amount of colostrum into that calf. A classic old way that people might feed calves would be they would start feeding that calf with a nipple bottle or a bucket. The calf wouldn't get, or they were nursing, they would get a little bit of colostrum and then no more for a few hours. And what happens if I get a small amount of colostrum in here, I get some absorption of IgGs and yes, maybe some bacteria also, but shuts the system down. And then when I wait and come back a couple hours later, hoping that calf will finish her colostrum, she may, but the absorption of IgGs is going to be drastically reduced at that point in time. So the key thing is once a farmer starts to feed colostrum, don't stop until they finish the entire amount that the calf wants. So management-wise, if they want to use a bottle, put the colostrum in the bottle. As soon as the calf stops drinking it, put the remaining colostrum in an esophageal feeder and feed it. That also should reduce the possibility of E. coli getting in there. But there's some real classical work showing that whatever is brought in front of this lumen of the small intestine first is what's going to end up in the blood. If it's IgGs, it's great. If it's E. coli, it's going to be there also. So there's a direct comparison. There's a little bit of IgGs that actually go in between the cells, but that's a real small amount. Most of it is carried across by an active transport system. Okay, so basically the blood IgG loads are going to rely on when it was fed. Oh, and I should say this system will shut down with time if nothing happens. If I take a calf and keep them in a disease-free environment, and there are times where, you know, the researchers has done that, put this calf in a disease-free environment, have nothing going into this calf, biologically by 24 hours, this does not function. So it definitely is a time critical step. This is the one where the quality of the colostrum, we used to say there were 3 things of important, and now it's 4. It's the timing, it's the quality, which is IgG and bacteria, and the quantity. Just to show you the important point, this is one. Bacteria wasn't shown to directly interfere with IgG absorption until 2015. So 6 years ago was the first time we ever had any data to actually prove that bacteria interfered. We've said it for many years. There was some indirect data, but this is a one that shows you the heat treatment of colostrum. Whoops, don't know why. In addition to that, and I think that's a management tool that many large farms are using that works very well. And what this is a study where they took and pooled one large batch of colostrum, so all calves were treated the same. That's an issue that I have when I'm reviewing literature based on colostrum research in calves. Sometimes different calves get different colostrum, and it's really hard to come up with a conclusion from that study. But this was one where all the calves were fed the same big batch of colostrum, and some of them it was unheated. It was just plain colostrum. It was good quality colostrum. They had it clean to start with. And then they took some of that, another group of calves got that same colostrum, but it was allowed to sit out at room temperature for about 8 hours. And colostrum can never be collected sterile. It's always going to have some bacteria. It's the nature of our milking systems. I mean, we can't get it perfect. Allow that bacteria to grow for 8 hours. And you basically can do everything else the same, but you'll cut IgG levels in the plasma by half just by having dirty colostrum. It was fed the same time, same everything, but it had high bacteria. They took some of that colostrum and what I call heat treated it, because there is no true definition for pasteurizing colostrum, but it's effectively doing that. But you heat treat it. If it's this is some of the stuff that was low, so it's just showing you the effect of heat treatment, and there's no effect. Now this number numerically is two numbers units higher, and that's the same, statistically the same as 21. So the bottom line is pasteurizing colostrum doesn't, if it's done correctly, does not kill IgGs or disable them from being absorbed. It works. But then they took some of this heat-treated colostrum and left it set out. Yes, reduce the bacteria number, but let it set out. In this case, it had to sit out on the milk house, or for about 24 hours. Got high bacteria again, and it's right back down to half. So heat treatment works, but bacteria cuts IgG absorption in half. And so if you ever get on a farm and see this bucket of colostrum sitting on the floor of the calf feeding area or wherever, and they talk about I'm going to be feeding this. What I will always do, and don't have to do it much anymore, but once in a while, I'll start talking about that bucket on the floor, and I always refer to it as bacteria soup. And the dairy farmer, it's usually not a great dairy farm, and they will correct me and say no, that's colostrum, and I'll say no, that's bacteria soup, because that's what it is. Yes.
In this study, heat treatment of the high bacteria colostrum was before or after the bacteria growth? Just to know if the bacteria must be alive or it's just bacteria fragments that was stopped.
They were live.
Okay. So
Yeah. So what they had to do here to get the heat-treated high colostrum, high bacteria, is they basically had to re-inoculate they heat-treated and then had to re-inoculate a small amount to get the bacteria to grow. Yeah.
Excuse me.
Yeah, there's a question. Okay.
Yeah. I just wanted to ask. Oh, sorry. What do you mean with proper pasteurization? Because you said that pasteurization, if it's done properly, will not kill IgG. What do you mean with the appropriate process?
Okay, I need the colostrum to be heated at I'm going to show that. I want to say it's been a while since I pointed out those numbers. So we don't want it to be too high in temperature, but it's a time and temperature relationship that we need to have.
Yeah, because I'm studying about that, and I know that there are two main possibilities. I mean, 60 Celsius degrees 60. For 60 minutes, or 60 Celsius degree for 30 minutes. 30 and minutes. I'm interested in this one. I just wanted to understand what do you think about that, and if you think it's more, proper than the 1 hour solution.
Okay, the 1 hour solution, there's really been two places around the world that did a lot of that work, and one was at Penn State and one was at Minnesota. The work at Minnesota did 60 degrees for 60 minutes. They basically they show that they reduce IgG levels a little bit more with that. The difference in those two are almost minimal in terms of the end result. And so I have always used a recommendation of 30 minutes. Because the data shows pretty clearly that the major organisms that are going to be causing problems, like E. coli, like Ionis and things, are 30 minutes is very adequate. So I've always kind of disagreed with that. It's not bad, but they have a much better chance on a farm to have detrimental effects on the IgGs, because a little bit of a mistake in terms of temperature or a little bit of mistake in terms of time when they're at 60 can throw them off faster.
Okay, so you think it's enough 30 minutes in order to kill the bacteria? It's enough for the calf.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, the only caveat I'd say with that, and it's where some of the Minnesota data initially started from, was that they were working with some samples that had terrible levels of bacteria, really, really high. And so by holding it at 60 degrees longer, it reduced those a little bit more. But if the colostrum is collected in a reasonable fashion, 30 minutes should be absolutely adequate.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes. Okay, for all of you people, I mean, we know how we can get bacteria in colostrum. Lots of different ways to do it. One of the key ones, though, from a management standpoint, always pay attention to is what the equipment that they're using to feed the calf. Unfortunately, those esophageal feeders, there's no good way to clean them out. And many of the systems that a farm uses to feed baby calves, they rinse out with warm water. They may rinse out with soapy water, but we have to remind them that to clean their milking system, they use a strong acid and a strong base, and then they rinse it out with chlorine. And those are the kind of things that we need to do with the calf feeding equipment in order to make sure we have the bacteria levels down. So it's just common sense management. Yeah, I love this picture. I took this of a farmer using this esophageal feeder, and of course his fingers are clean. He's not adding any bacteria by sticking his fingers inside of that esophageal feeder. And he didn't mean, he posed for this picture and he didn't really know why I was taking it, but yeah, it's just some things that we don't necessarily think about, and it's our place to talk to these people and you know, remind them that this is what you're doing. And then this esophageal feeder, these can be a real problem, and most farms will use these just for feeding healthy calves. But there are once in a while you'll find a farm that will use one of these because they're putting electrolytes into a sick calf, and then go ahead and use that for the healthy calf. And of course we know that's not good. And so many of the modes of transmission, as we all know, and I admit this wasn't a slide really meant for veterinarians, but there's just so many of the disease problems that affect the calf that have fecal oral way of transmission. So, you know, that's just keeping that colostrum clean is so important. And it is the reason why a lot of farms, a lot of larger farms that I run in with, where you have multiple people feeding calves, and quite frankly, the level of people that we can hire on farms, unfortunately around the world, that take care of calves, I mean, they're not always well-educated people. They may not know all these things, and it may be hard to keep it consistent. So farms have gotten pretty good at, okay, we have various steps to do to get colostrum, in terms of cleaning the cow, et cetera, but that's where pasteurizing fits in, because it's making sure, one of the steps in pasteurizing colostrum is that you measure IgGs with some means of measuring, whether it's a colostrometer or a refractometer, but you measure it before you pasteurize it. And then that's always a step in there, which means they're getting rid of, they're not pasteurizing colostrum that isn't good. And so, you know, we put these steps in, and that's why they're being used. It's basically to get management so it's consistent and has a few checks in it. and balances in it so that hopefully the end result is all calves being fed well. Okay. And I guess the point with this slide is that this is looking at hours after feeding and the relative amount of solids, protein, casein, et cetera in here. And it's just that colostrum is only true colostrum right back here early on. The longer you wait, the lower these levels are. It's not that the IgGs in the which aren't manufactured in the mammary gland. The IgGs are filtered from the blood before calving, and what happens in today's world is that we have bred our cows to turn on milk production immediately after calving at high levels. And so maybe 25 years ago, we could wait 8 hours after calving or 4 hours after calving and still have a good concentration of IgGs. But that isn't the case anymore on our high producing cows. They start diluting out that colostrum immediately. And one of the biggest reasons you will always find when a farmer is telling you that much of the colostrum isn't high quality, you ask them, when do they milk that cow?
No, forse vi siete sbagliato qua fa. Tonino Mecca, cominciate a fare. Una settimana fa già ti ho detto che non è così. Tu devi andare.
Oh, okay, all right. But it's just one of the most common things. The other thing that happens a lot is that farms don't want to put in a secondary milking system to milk the fresh cows in the maternity pen. They want to move them over into the parlor to milk them the first time. And that just happens a lot. I understand what's behind that, but what very often happens then is that the cows don't get milked for first colostrum until the end of that milking cycle. So they may have to wait 4 hours until all the cows are milked, and they're going to run the fresh cows through, especially if it's a first calf heifer. They're not going to stop and run a heifer through, which means they've got a delay. And as their cows become higher and higher producing cows, that delay becomes more and more important. And it can really upset the balance of nature to the point where they have to have a portable secondary system or a secondary system of some sort to milk those cows out immediately after calving. That's just all there is to it. And it's only going to get worse or become more of a problem. Okay, factors affecting IgG concentration. What I have done with producers anymore is this is the #1 reason: bacteria. Basically affecting what's happening. Where that was never there, and admittedly, it's probably not always the #1 case, but I will always list that way anymore because it is so important. So you guys in food safety, you have an important role there. First milking volume is very critical. This gets into that item I was just talking about there in terms of how soon after calving does she get milked, and that's going to show up in first milking volume. There's a lot of field studies showing us that the higher the volume, the lower the IgG level. This also comes into play of whether it's an older cow or a first lactation animal. I have to be careful. We have this term in the U.S., I don't know whether you use it or not, we say first lactation heifer, first calving heifer. Well, by definition, a heifer hasn't had a calf, but we tend to mix those up, so I'll apologize if I do. Yeah, I've heard farmers say second calf heifer. Well, she's a cow. She's not a second calf heifer. Anyway, with the volume come into play, What happens is the heifer, the first lactation animal, has been exposed to less diseases and less number of times. So in theory, her IgG specificity or the amount of IgGs that she has are probably going to be less. And if you look at the big studies, they will always be a little bit less. But on a practical importance, it's probably so little that it does not make a difference. The studies that got us back into that many years ago were done where animals that had not calved weren't well vaccinated and weren't around the herd, so they were exposed to diseases. In today's world, most of the heifers are raised on the farm where the adult cows are, so they get disease transfer back and forth. They're exposed to the same diseases that the older cows have, and our vaccination programs are almost always the heifers are vaccinated the same as cows, and so they're much more similar today than they ever were before. And if we don't use heifer colostrum, a farmer isn't going to have enough colostrum out there, but their volume is often low. The other thing that you're going to find is the volume, certain seasons of the year, and in certain areas, you'll have cows that will calve in the first 2 hours after calving, they have not enough colostrum to feed that calf. And that is a management problem. It's usually related to the stress on the dry cows. It's heat stress primarily that will do it, but sometimes it is other stresses that are out there. And there's no perfect answer for that. I have been on farms where you can not come up with an answer, but you will find some cows, and sometimes it's whole groups of cows for a season that simply will not have more than 1 liter or 2 liters of colostrum the first few hours of life, and it's a real issue. So it means they have to have a bank of colostrum in the freezer that they've saved from previous seasons, or rely on a substitute for that. That issue is just becoming more and more prevalent. Immune status of the dams important here. Length of the dry period. Once in a while you'll find a system or a situation where a cow calves with little or no dry period because of a mistake, and it can definitely make an impact on IgG levels and the colostrum and the age of the cow. But I put age of the cow down last. We used to say that was big, and it's not really anymore. Breed does have an effect. The higher the protein level in the milk, the higher the IgG level tends to be. So the brown Swiss and the Jersey and some of the other high protein breeds that you may have in the mountains will have higher levels of IgG, but that's what it is. Leaking prior to calving can have a big effect, and this is the main reason why I tell farmers measure IgG before you feed it to the calf, because it may not be good. And as I already talked about, season of the year may have an impact on that, and it's usually related to heat stress. Dry cow nutrition will have some effect, but it's usually more on the positive thing. This is one that's interesting. I don't know if you do it at all here, but 20 years ago, when I talked to a dairy farmer, I would always say when the calf is born, the first thing you do is give it an injection of selenium and vitamin E, and then give it colostrum. Well, we've changed management and quite consistently so that dry cows are fed selenium and vitamin E at high enough levels. Primarily, or one of the big reasons we've known it has a lot to do with mastitis. but we've improved the level in the calf at birth and the colostrum to the point where white muscle disease is not a problem in calves, at least in the US, and we don't even talk about that. It's probably the same here, I think.
We have some in
Okay.
Greece, yes, especially
But dry cow nutrition, if it's done well, can eliminate any of the issues with white muscle disease, but it still could be out there. I've already talked about this. It's something that a lot of farms do. When you're out in practice, I always encourage people, when you have the opportunity to get a blood sample from that calf, it's you know, check for blood proteins or IgG levels, just as a way to help the farm improve their management. Lots of different ways to do it, but it's such a simple thing to do that every farm can do it. This is just one of the studies that I stuck in here to answer the question, which I guess I've already done, of do I feed a calf with a, where's my arrow? Come on, arrow. There it is. Okay. Do I feed it with a nipple bottle or an esophageal feeder? And this was a study where all the calves were fed exactly the same pooled colostrum. So even though I don't recommend a farmer pool colostrum from disease standpoint, I never do. But for research, it's great. But some calves were fed all of their colostrum, 3.8 liters, from a nipple bottle, and some none, all the way up to some fed none with the nipple bottle and all of it with the esophageal feeder. And this is their IgG levels at 24 hours, and they're virtually all the same. So it really makes no difference. And the apparent efficiency of absorption is really high. So that is one thing I guess I can point out for this audience, is that the efficiency of absorption of IgGs is nowhere near 100%. And with good management and low bacteria number, we can get it at 35 to 40%. The older literature, if you look at it, you would see apparent efficiency of absorptions of 20 or 25% as being normal. 25 used to be high, but with good management, it's easy to get it up to 35, which is one of the reasons why we're taking the same quality of colostrum. It is the reason we're taking the same quality of colostrum and we're getting serum IgG levels consistently higher today, and we can do it than we used to do. It's because we're improving management, which ends up here of getting more of those IgGs across. We still have this issue of failure of passive transfer of antibodies, and that, as I said, we have less than 10 grams per liter of IgGs. It's called, it's this term failure, and it's a good word to use with producers you didn't do it right. The calf may live, but she's going to have problems, and they may have long-term effects on that calf. So they need to do all these things right. Feed good quality colostrum is one of the key things, and this is the management tool that a farm has to use. Either use this colostrometer, which was the thing that was developed in 1979 and still works. It measures the specific the density of this colostrum, and the relationship of the density the correlation is about 0.6, 0.7. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. We can also use a refractometer, which actually measures the sugar content. Again, the correlation is only 0.6, 0.7, so it is not perfect. Sometimes we tend to think this is a newer system that may be better. They're the same, but they do allow a producer to cull out the bottom end of their colostrum that isn't good. And this is one that I have used so many times with producers. If they're a good producer, a bad producer, or an excellent producer, I basically tell them I can guarantee that if they start using this consistently, they will reduce mortality or morbidity on their calves in every situation. Even the good calf manager, if they use this, they will have healthier calves in general because they've taken that bottom end of their colostrum and they're not using it. And on any of your farms, you're going to find even the best managed farms, 5 to 10% of their colostrum is poor quality. On an average farm, it might be 20%, but even the best farms, a little bit of that colostrum is bad. And it's because the cow leaked before calving. Genetically, once in a while, something happened with her. I mean, there's a lot of reasons, some we can explain, some we can't, that the end result of colostrum isn't good. Pull it out of the system and no calf has to get that poor quality colostrum, and it just helps a lot. So I tell a farmer this is a management step that has to be done, absolutely, no exceptions for this, and so I encourage you to do this. It's gotten to be much more common, but not consistent. It just needs to be consistent. Colostrum storage, freezing it works well. Lots of good systems there. If they freeze it, I always prefer some way to freeze it, like a plastic bag, not necessarily a gallon jug or 4-liter bottle. And that's only because I want that to be able to thaw out fast. The problem with this is if I have a container that is 4 liters, it's going to take an hour or more for that to thaw out, and that means I'm going to delay feeding colostrum to that calf. So that becomes a problem. Again, many of these colostrum pasteurizing systems that a large farm uses has kind of a bag storage system, and they also have a way to defrost that colostrum that's fast, and it works really well. So they're good systems there. If it's even a large farm, I don't want to see refrigeration more than 24 hours. And it's because we know that even in near freezing temperatures, there are certain bacteria that will grow some in a refrigerator. So one day only. These systems are just so great. I've seen more and more of it. It's kind of pretty common that any farm, for us, if we have 500 cows or more, they have a colostrum system on the farms, and they have all the good systems there. For those of you not used to this system, you have these bags which they're not really reusable. I've seen people use them some, but they cost a couple of euros a piece. But you pasteurize, you put colostrum in there, you pasteurize it, and then it has either a nipple or a tube feeder system that goes on the end of it. So virtually, it's pretty much impossible to contaminate this once you've pasteurized it. I'm sure some people, can do it, but they do really work out well. You're laughing, why? 'Cause I say you're laughing because you've seen some people do this wrong? No, okay, all right.
Because the people don't know that the pasteurization
one thing.
I'm missing your.
Perché lui stava dicendo che le persone non sanno che queste buste non possono essere riutilizzate. Because the people don't know that these steps are for only one use.
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah.
They use it a lot of times.
Many times, yeah. Okay, all right, yeah. It's like anything else, yeah, human nature, we don't want to. If they clean them out and sterilize them, they're probably okay to use a few times, but they got to keep them clean. And the problem with these systems is they're the way they're manufactured. They have corners in them here, which are really hard to clean out. Yeah. So, all right. So, you know, your job as a veterinarian is you know, it's out there. You're going to have, you know, you have job security on these farms to keep going back and seeing what they're doing to try to, you know, upset the system.
Excuse me.
Okay.
May I ask a question about the defrosting process? Because there is, in my opinion, a little bit of confusion about the temperature, because I had this discussion with other nutritionists, and they say that you do not have to exceed the 42 Celsius degrees for the defrosting, but I don't know if you use 45, 46 Celsius degree, do you think it could be a problem for the defrosting process, for the quality of the colostrum?
The defrosting, that's where it's hard to find good data on this. It kind of comes down to if I cook the protein with too much heat, I will denature those IgGs, and they're not gonna function. But there isn't real good data for that. You know, management-wise, hot water works best, but unless they're cooking the proteins, it's probably not going to be a problem.
Okay, so if you stay under the 50, 55 degrees, which, if I remember well, are the temperatures in which the protein starts to denaturate, it would be okay in hot water, I mean, of course. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
thank you very much. Sorry.
Right. If they don't use, you know, in theory, if they take water directly out of the hot water heater in a milk house, it's too hot. Because we have to heat it higher to clean out our milking systems, but usually by the time they get it into a sink, and by the time they get all this, you know, it's cooled down a little bit and works out. But again, those colostrum processing systems have it worked out so it keeps the water up to a pretty good temperature, but you know, doesn't go over. So they just have to kind of use some common sense with that, but there is not good data to show me where I'm cooking the protein. And you know, if you do cook a little bit of protein on the very outside of the container, all the rest of it is still going to be viable. So it's probably not it's probably more theoretical problem than practical problem.
Okay, thank you very much.
But it's storing it in something that they can get thawed out faster, that really has such a big impact. That old system of storing it in 4-liter containers is terrible, because it takes 2 hours to thaw that out, and then by then the calf has already been exposed to everything.
Yes. Yes, I was thinking about the utilization of the typical bags, and okay, which temperature I should set on the, I don't know, the machine, how to call it in order to defrost it in a proper way, because farmers sometimes ask it to us, of course. Okay, is it a problem if we use 45 or 46 degrees instead of 42, because there is a little bit of confusion about that. So it was just for this problem, I mean, using the bag, as you said. Thank you.
Yeah, that solves a lot of the problems.
Okay.
Definitely, yeah.
Thank you very much.
This is just another slide I had in here. I've already covered this, but I can't, you've got to keep reinforcing this bacterial concentration in colostrum has such a major impact on the quality of that colostrum. And if you want, the goals that are published on that is having is a colostrum that has less than 100,000 CFUs of bacteria, and the published goals is less than 500 CFUs of coliforms. I really hope in most situations we can get coliform levels a lot lower than that. My extension publications will have less than 100 coliform CFUs per mil, just because the cleaner the better. So 500 is not good. And we know that. Then we have the colostrum replacers or substitutes. There are lots of those out on the market. If you have a producer that's going to be using these, first of all, the supplements they need to make sure they pay attention to how many IgGs are in that product. It's on the bag. It has to be labeled that way. I think in all the world, so they have to tell you whether it really is a substitution or a supplement. It's virtually the same product, whatever is there. It's whether just the level of IgGs in it is going to dictate what it has. If it's going to be a substitute, it needs to have much greater than 100 IgGs in it, probably more like 200 or 300. And let me see where I'm gonna, this is cutting off from my top. This is basically just showing you that based on the percent of pre-weaned calves, what happens with some of our diseases as we go along here based on the quality of the colostrum. But basically, I think in general, and I'm sure this is the same for Italian herds, is that our levels of mortality may be going down a little bit, but we still have a lot of problems with scours and respiratory disease out on farms. In the U.S., at least 20 to 25% of our calves between birth and weaning have at least one incidence of scours, and 10% on average have some respiratory, we lose calves because of respiratory problems. But most of the death on calves, it has to do with scours. This is where with some new data, we're getting different sets of recommendations in terms of the passive transfer of immunity of where serum IgG should be. And we've got 4 categories, and that this was really never done this way. This paper was just published in 2020, and what Jason did here, the Lombard from USDA, is he got about upwards of 20 calf specialists around the world to be co-authors on this paper, and I had been involved in this, and we had many conference calls and Zoom conference calls. Get back here on this one, but based on this data set and other published research, we came up with 4 categories of where serum IgGs could be in terms of excellent, good, fair, and poor. And the poor, again, was less than 10 grams per liter of IgG, and that seems to be a very, that's a pretty good cutoff. I won't get into this directly in detail, but we don't have to measure serum IgGs because it's a 2-day process. It's not going to be something you're going to do in practice, but the correlation between total protein or bricks is very good, and so we can use either one. The problems you have with some of these, especially the bricks I run into, is that the difference here between the different categories on bricks is pretty close. So you have to pay real attention to when you're reading that refractometer. There is no direct line of blue to white in that. It's usually a little fuzzy in between, and so it may be a little difficult to do that and get accurate numbers, but the correlation is still very good with either of those systems. So I don't care which one you use. But what we found from our USDA data, which was again represented over 2,300 calves from about I think it was 700, almost 800 farms. So it's a pretty good representation of the U.S. population, and it fits in reasonably well with other published research that we saw from around the world. Was we can get about 35% of the calves in the U.S. that are having levels of greater than 25. So this is super, and so we came up. So in today's world, our recommendations are that you want to promote a farm to have 40% of their calves here, and the well-managed farms can do that. And I don't want any down here under 10. But we know full well that 1 or 2 calves are going to slip by and they're going to be low, but we can really get those levels of IgGs up higher now than we ever have before with management. I guess I already covered things on efficiency of absorption, so I don't need to get into this, but other than to say that the old numbers of the blue lines of 20 or 25% are old. We can get those higher. We can get more IgGs absorbed. But the data still shows us that by 6 hours after birth, it goes way down no matter what system. So timing is so critical. Now I'll just go on through these. This is a repeat of that other slide, and I think I covered it all there. It just the new systems out there work pretty well. We see, this is one to keep in mind when you're measuring. If you've got a farm using a colostrum substitute or replacers, because they need a boost in IgG levels. Many of the older colostrum substitutes and supplements were merely dried bovine colostrum, and there's still some of those out there that are being used where they have a system where they collect colostrum from dairy farmers, dry it down, measure it. They've got good quality control. They eliminate bacteria, and basically put it in a bag and sell it back to the farms. But there are some new systems now where they take colostrum and add rennin to it and take the casein and fat out. And what's that? And so what that's based on is there's really good data to show us that unfortunately casein is one of the things that interferes with IgG absorption. And that's only been proven the last maybe 3-4 years, where there's studies to clearly show that casein is a bad thing for IgG absorption. Unfortunately, casein, is going to be there. But the calf can take care of that on their own with colostrum because they get a curd formation. which has casein and fat in there, but Mother Nature's had that so that casein has been taken out, but many of the other colostrum substitutes, it doesn't work that way. So the new colostrum substitutes have, and supplements have casein taken out. They get really good absorption of the IgGs because you have no casein and no bacteria in there. The only thing is when you as a practitioner now measure blood protein, or the farmer measures blood protein with either with any of their systems with a refractometer, they're going to have a low level of protein. And so what it is the ratio of blood protein to IgGs are different in those systems, and because they don't have the casein in there. And so what you end up with is you have to use really a different scale of blood protein to recommendation. Your blood protein is going to be lower because of that. Right now, there aren't really good recommendations for that. There's a few out there. You're basically saying probably 15 to 20% less in blood protein is still giving you high IgG levels. But what we need to have is some new scales that we can use to show us that, hey, this calf was fed a colostrum replacer, its blood protein is here. Now, is this good or bad? But I think in the meantime, until we get good data out on there, if you have a calf that you know was fed a substitute, you can accept lower total protein and it's still good. Did that make sense? I hope, because we see there's just a lot of good studies out there showing us that timing and bacteria are the big things. Just we're getting more and more studies there. So in summary, colostrum is number one. Calves can absorb them early on. We need to make it mandatory on farms to test colostrum. That's the bare minimum that you need to do with every one of your farmers, and then we can go from there. But testing colostrum to eliminate that bad quality colostrum is got to be done. Don't know if there's anything else in there I haven't already covered. I do think we want to get our well-managed farms to have nearly half of their calves having real high levels of IgGs, and if they have a high level of IgGs, they're going to be a healthy calf, almost always. And those are the levels in terms of total protein or bricks that I want to have on farms. So I think with that, I can end on colostrum, and I don't know how long yeah. Okay.
Shall we make a break? Then I need to ask to...
Yeah, but they have to go pretty soon, right?
I think that's actually there. There's actually there. So we have still 7 minutes for the questions, then we can stop.
Okay.
We don't need, you can give me the time for the date. You want to present the data. But we are done.
Yeah, we have a few minutes for that?
We have 7 minutes for that.
Okay. Okay, all right. Questions?
Just want to ask, because before we were talking about farmers who prefer to use the tube to feed their cows. I have seen the same situation. I'm talking with a farmer who, for all cows, he uses the tube. And when I asked why, don't they suck on their own? I prefer like this. But did you find a real reason why they are preferring the tube? Or?
It's just an ease of management. Yeah, I probably 10-20% of the farmers are going to do that anymore. That's their standard operating procedure to use a tube feeder, and it's fine as long as it's done well. Yeah.
Maybe that way they can be sure that the cost assumed cost as they do the other things in the market. I don't know.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Anything else? Well, if I've got 5 minutes, I could show them just a couple slides on analyzing data, because I've got a great example for them that fits caps. Yeah. Okay. Let me, but I have to switch slides, unfortunately. And okay, now if I boot this, if I put this up, is this going to go directly? Okay, that's the one I want to use.
Which one? Okay. Okay. You just select. No, you have to go back here.
That's what I thought.
We have to go back here. Here. On this one. Okay. Where is it? Say something. Okay, we have to go back here, okay? Then stop the presentation. It's telling someone in New Jersey to do that. And we can, okay, you want?
That's bias calf milk replacer. You may have to go down, scroll down.
Okay, we click here. Okay. What we can do to make things faster, you can simply select the whole screen, and then the window.
Here it is, first one. Yeah.
Bias.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you go to, okay. Prepare your slides. You must have someone working out a few details. The slide will be still working on it. Okay, it's getting. It's coming. Let's wait. Takes longer. Let me do something else. It's easier. Look, we share the whole screen.
Okay.
And then you select what you want to show. You go to here. You select the whole screen.
Okay, I was thinking we were doing it over there.
Yeah, but it is saying it's having difficulties. So now you're sharing the whole screen. Okay. So then you start the presentation. You should be okay. You're showing everything that is listed. Okay.
Okay. Is that good?
Just wait.
Perfect. Okay. I'll just go through this, and I'll try to do it in 5 minutes, if possible. It's just a great example, and I'm using a calf example of calf milk replacer feeding, and what you have to deal with is that you get someone throws a study out at you and says, here, this is good information. It's changing the way we need to do this or whatever. And what I always tell people is if someone gives you some research data and wants you to make a recommendation for it, after you read the abstract of the paper, the most important thing to read is the methods. And unfortunately, students and practitioners, we all go to the results. We all want the summary. But people who write papers always have a bias. And myself included. I mean, you've got a bias towards your research, but almost always people will tell you what they did in their methods and materials. So I tell graduate students the most important part that you read is the methods and materials. The second most important part that you read in a paper is the methods and materials the second time. You're going to miss something the first time, and it is so critical. And hopefully this works. Okay, being slow. This is this is 2012, but it happened a little bit before this and some. This is a paper that was called a meta-analysis in the journal. And as I told you yesterday, to me, a meta-analysis is a very effective way for us to learn a good recommendation based off of 10 or 20 studies to give to our producers, because it encompasses many different studies. Well, in this case, they called it a meta-analysis, so it's misleading. It should be great data. And then they have this classical example, and this is one that I'm sure you have seen because some of the industry around the world, a lot of industry around the world selling milk replacers has used this as an example. And they all rely on the fact that no one reads the methods. But they showed a whole bunch of data here. It's basically what this study, their conclusion is that if I feed more milk to a calf and get her to grow faster, she herself will produce more milk in her first lactation. So basically they're saying improving growth rate in that baby calf improves her potential to produce milk. And they were talking about 1,000 or 2,000 pounds of milk in a lactation, which is big and could have profound impact. And so you look at this, and this table's been used a million times around the world. But the column here I'm looking at here is the milk yield as a percent of control or kilograms. You know, if I feed these calves more milk, I get, you know, they're saying 9,000 kilograms more milk in a first lactation, 7,000 more, huge amounts. And they convinced a lot of the industry and a lot of dairy farmers to start feeding more and more milk based off of this. Well, you read the methods, and what you find out are, and this study was published in 2012, but two of the studies in there, one was done in 1994, one was published in 2005, and they were abstracts. An abstract is 100 to 200 word summary of that someone used when they were going to go to a meeting. There's no peer review. You just write down 200 words based on, you know, to get your paper accepted so you can talk to a group. Not good data. Two other ones were in there, abstracts and personal communication. And they said this in the methods materials. This is how they got it. Personal communication. I called you up and say, what do you think of this? You know, and you told me what you think of your data or what you think of it. No validity whatsoever. A conference proceeding, no validity whatsoever, no peer review. This one was a completely confounded study. When you read this study, you had no idea what was going on with it. It was garbage. This is an unpublished study of a regression analysis of unpublished data. And they told you it was unpublished data. They just pulled some data out of something. But then they made a major conclusion based off of this. The other thing that I want to show you on this is that this unpublished data here has 400K, it has an N of 400. When I'm doing a meta-analysis, the number of animals in each analysis does have an impact, but most of these have low numbers of animals, but this one has 400. Okay, and it happens to be the same author. So he biasly took 400 of his own data points and used it in his own analysis, but it wasn't published in the first place. So that's a hint right away that there's something wrong with this. They also took this and he made this regression of milk yield difference here between the treatment and control and the effective average daily gain, and he has this relationship here The interesting thing is his own data that had 400 calves in it is this one out here on the end. So he's pulled that line up there. And if you and I were to look at that of all equal data sets, I would say it's this. But this is what the milk replacer industry used to say you'll get 1,000 pounds or 1,500 or 1,000 kilos more milk in a first lactation by feeding your calves more. And it made a big impact in many places around the world. Then what happened after that is that there was a published meta-analysis that had 11 studies in it that were peer-reviewed. It was done in the Journal of Dairy Science, which is a little better at doing meta-analysis, in 2016. And to really look at this situation, 2 of the studies couldn't be used in this. One of them was that confounded study. And again, the methods and materials in this for meta-analysis shows you what keywords they use to search the worldwide literature, and you have to accept every paper that you find in the worldwide literature in the meta-analysis in order to do it correctly. But you can say why you eliminate one or a few studies, in this case a confounded one, but it has to be specific. And another one which was this guy's data. He did some really interesting things, but basically he had no dry matter intake data in there, no IgG data, no health data, and it was done as a retrospective study, which means he had lactation data currently, and he went back and said, well, I wonder what happened to these calves 5 years ago. Which the validity of the data goes down when you do something like that, because you never really know what happened to those calves 5 years ago. So reading that one, you had to eliminate that study. Yeah, also they just had some real problems with that data. But anyway, to show you that there were 9 peer-reviewed published studies after his meta-analysis that all showed there was no difference. You can feed a calf more milk or you can feed a calf a control amount, has no impact on first lactation milk production. For time, I'll skip through this. There's more variability when you give me herd data. When you start analyzing herd data, you're going to find a huge amount of variability on a farm. And that's genetics, that's management, that's cows. You're always going to have variability in there. But what they ended up showing was that 2% of what you find in the effective average daily gain, 2% has to do with how fast the calf grew, which could be related to nutrition, but is probably related to the genetics of feed efficiency or genetics in general. But that 98% was just farm variation in there, so doesn't have an effect. And my point on this is that this is showing average daily gain on the bottom and first lactation milk yield there. You can have a calf that grows at a relatively slow rate and she may have high milk production in first lactation. She may have lower, not huge, but a variation in there, and that's genetics, that's management. There is a little bit of improvement here, and this is at 2.3%, which is probably genetics. So I did show this one yesterday. The other interesting thing from this is that even though it's it's 2.3%, the meta-analysis is able to tease out that a great majority, the vast majority of that increase in milk production, if it falls down to nutrition, has to do with rumen development and its grain intake, it's not milk intake. So that whole concept of feeding calves more milk provides more milk in the milk tank for the producer is clearly false, and it was all based off of a lot of it was based off of one bad study where it was misanalyzed. But just like Facebook, it gets out there around the world, and we have all these people that don't want to have a vaccine because of what they saw on Facebook. You know, it's the same kind of thing that's happened. And this is just one example of it. I leave it for you guys is that when a representative gives you some conclusions and says, hey, so and so produced this study that shows this and this, ask them for the paper and read the methods. It's amazing what you can learn. Hopefully it's all good, but the peer-reviewed system around the world, well, there's two problems we have. One is a peer-reviewed system has two people read a paper before it's accepted or rejected. That's the way all the systems are. Sometimes there'll be three, but usually only three if one says reject it and one says accept it. So you got two people reading it, and in today's world, all these guys that are untenured, are you untenured? No, you're tenured now, yeah. But you know, you get untenured faculty members that they have to publish papers or they're going to be fired. And if a good journal won't accept your paper, there are other journals, there's 100 other journals out there that will. Publishing papers is actually a good money-making thing for publishers these days. And there are bad research that gets published out there, and we have to live with that. But just be careful that Facebook and some journals have similar ranges of data quality. Okay. Thank you for your attention on that. Yeah.
Yeah. Then we have more than 100 participants online, both from the Master of Food Production in general, so they touch on medicine, and Master for Food Hygiene. Then we have students from the 4th to the 5th year. So I think it was very interesting for the audience here this morning. They will remain on internet, so they might contact you for. Bene, ragazzi, facciamo una pausa di 15 minuti, alle 11:30 riprendiamo con Anna Giovanna Fermani e dottor Menditto. Grazie, a fra poco.
Ragazzi, grazie, buona giornata, buon continuo, ci vediamo a lunedì, grazie.
Grazie, buona giornata.
I remain here because now I have the second slot with only the okay.
Oh, back up here. And